My mother, when she would drink, was violent. And this was at an early age, because I'm the oldest. And I could tell when my mother was going to turn in, have one of these drunken rages. And I learned to listen for it, and I could almost tell. If my mother was by herself, I was gonna get beat. I just knew instinctively. So when she started drinking, I'd go down the hallway, and then I would literally take a pillow and a blanket, and I would just lay prone across the door, and I would just lay with my head down so I could hear under the door. And I could hear her, literally hear her, just swearing at the TV or swearing at anything. You could just hear her cussing, and then it'd get quiet. And then something like this would happen. Where's the goddamn book? Or where's the goddamn this? Who in the hell took my... And I knew that she was going to look for it with me or my brothers or my sister.
I told you don't make me come up here. Are you hiding in your room again?
And then she walked down the hallway, cussing the entire time.
Open the door. I know you in there. I can hear you, Jimmy. I know you in there. You got my keys. I told you to give me. Don't you hide again in this room.
And then she pushed the door. And then it gets louder, and I push back against the door. And then she kind of pushed it through, and then I knew what was gonna happen. I knew she was gonna beat me.
Open the door, Jimmy! Don't lock no doors on me! Where you at, Jimmy? Where you at? I'ma find you, I found you! I told you I was gonna find you!
And then she'd have a belt or a switch or something, and she would just beat. And then you could just hear her cussing at me the entire time. I never was a child, not ever. So when people talk about the best parts of your childhood, I'm like, I don't know, I'll let you know when I have one.
The point where I did leave and I filed for divorce was after I realized that I was doing more harm to my children by staying than I would be by leaving. We had a weekend trip at a water park with our kids. And we went home afterwards, and we were in the living room.
Shut up and leave me alone. Go upstairs.
There was some arguing, and I had a glass of water next to me.
Oh, who cares what you feel?
I threw the water at him. And he was enraged.
What is your problem?
And the next thing I know, we're standing up in the living room. And he put his hands around my neck.
You hear me? No.
And he choked me. And what I remember were the kids screaming. And my oldest daughter grabbing her toddler, and then the other two kids running behind her up the stairs, crying.
Acid in your face, you hear me?
And I grabbed the phone and I locked myself in the bathroom. And I laid on the floor on the cold tile. And I remember thinking, what am I gonna do? I
911, what's your emergency?
dialed 911. But I was pregnant with our 5th child. And I thought, if I call the police, they're gonna make me leave, and what am I gonna do? My teaching degree had expired. I couldn't take care of myself and 4 kids and a baby on the way. So I didn't call. And there was no record of it. I wanted to teach my kids by example that it's not okay to be treated like that. It's not okay to be abused. And I realized that they could end up being in situations themselves if I didn't take action on it.
Life for me growing up was difficult at times. I always knew my mother loved me. And so to me, we kind of had the cream of the crop when it came to in the trailer park. I mean, my mom was always home. She didn't do drugs. She struggled with her mental health, but she was always there. She made sure that we were fed. We always had a roof over our head, even if we were staying with family members. We moved all the time. When things would go south, she would just put us on a Greyhound bus and we'd head to the next place. And so there were a lot of Mama's boyfriends in and out of the house. I mean, it wasn't, I knew I was loved, but I also knew that I had to protect myself and her and my sisters many times. The final incident of my stepdad beating my mom, that was a deciding moment in my life that I'm not going to do this anymore. I can't do this anymore. We had just moved into a new trailer, and they were in the back room, and he was beating her. And I was trying to put the dishes away. And I took a break and was sitting at the kitchen table eating a bowl of cereal, and he was still beating her. And she started screaming as she would. And then she came out of the back room, and I could see down the hall, I could see her come out from where I was sitting at the table eating my cereal. And she was half dressed. She took off out the back door and screamed, "Run, he's got a knife." I'd been through it so many times that I sat there and ate my cereal. And he came out of the bedroom and he had the knife held up in his right hand. And he came towards me with his crazy eyes and bobbing and screaming, and he said, "I'll kill you."
I'm gonna kill you.
And I had the most peace that I've ever had. And I just looked at him and I said, "You better go get her first, because she's out there calling the police and she's half naked." And I just took another bite of cereal. And he turned around immediately and ran out the back door after her. And when he did, I jumped up and ran out the door that was the sliding door that was next to me, next to the kitchen table. And I ran as fast as I could and as hard as I could to the trailer park next to us. And an elderly lady answered the door. I told her what had happened. I was crying, and she called the police. And I ran back to try to find Mama and help her. And I knew, looking at Mama and her crying, and the neighbors hugging her, and I knew she wouldn't press charges. And I have to say, I mean, the reason that a lot of women don't press charges is because it's worse for them when they do, you know? It makes the person harming you matter. And we had been through that. We'd been through her getting a worse beating because of me calling the cops before. And so at that moment, I knew. It's like, you have to make that decision as a child. Are you going to call the cops and have your mom beat worse for what you've done, and literally have your mom go bail him out? But I knew that I couldn't be moving those chess pieces in my head anymore. I had to get out. Regardless of what it made my future look like, I couldn't be there anymore.
The biggest problem that we see is when a child is exposed to domestic violence. They're not in a position in which they may have been physically harmed, but they've been harmed. And that exposure to that harm is really problematic. And I don't think that our society fully appreciates how concerning that problem is. Medical experts are all over the place as far as how horrific exposure to domestic violence is. The experts that I've talked to, that I've read about on countless occasions, describe the fact that the brain, in many situations involving the exposure, not the actual physical abuse itself, but just the exposure. And I say just, but that exposure is enough to cause the brain to stop functioning in the way that it would. In many instances, it stops the brain from functioning. It stops the brain from developing because of the high stress that that child is in, whether they see it, whether or not they hear it. But the fear that is put into that child by learning that their loved one is exposed is horrific. And there are studies that make it clear that the chance of a boy becoming an abuser himself is greatly increased by his exposure to his father's abuse of someone, whether it's his mother or a step-parent. And the chances of a girl who has witnessed her mother's abuse increase, and they skyrocket to her being a victim herself. It's a huge problem.
Domestic violence on children is very devastating because sometimes children have grown up with the violence from the time that they can remember. And sometimes domestic violence on the parents can lead to child abuse on the children. It can lead to sexual abuse. So it doesn't just necessarily stop with the abuse of the parent, either parent in the home. It can go to children. It can go to sexual. It can continue on. The cycle can continue and continue and continue. So it can be very devastating that even when children grow up to be adults, they think that's the expected behavior when they get with their partners, that it's okay to abuse because they have lived with it their entire lives.
The stuff that happens early in childhood, when we are in the womb even, and 2 and 3 and 5, those are the formative years that lay down what is going to happen for us later in life. Who we're going to be in this world is influenced by our environment. We remember what stuff feels like. We remember what stuff feels like from the time that we were in the womb. And that influences what happens later in our life. And we have those feelings that come up. We don't know where did that come from? Well, it's something that happened way deep when you were young, when you were just a newborn, or when you were in the womb. Why would it be that it has been recommended that, when you've got a baby in your belly, that you talk to it and you do baby talk, "Hi, I'm going to come see you soon. You're going to come out and be with me." Or we play music, put some headphones on and play some Bach over your belly and have the husband, have your husband come by and the dad say, "Hey, it's me, it's Daddy." Why do we do that if it doesn't really matter? No, because we know it does matter. That's a positive effect that it has on the child's development in the womb. Well, you know what? When you're being screamed at, and verbally abused, emotionally isolated, or physically abused, that has an effect on the child in the womb as well. We just don't know exactly how until that starts to play out later in life. Those are cycles and patterns that we need to look at breaking. And how can we get parents to identify that, and we get students, teenagers, young adults to see that there is a way to recognize and say, that's not healthy, and I'm going to move towards these things that are.